Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us on this very timely and tense time in this region. As much as it might be summer holidays in some parts of the world, as some of you know, the Middle East never rests. As we speak, Israel is now bracing for a potential multi-day attack by Iran and its allied proxies, such as Hezbollah and the Houthis, following the assassination of two senior terrorist leaders last week. Hamas's Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, in an attack that Iran has accused Israel for, and the targeted elimination of Hezbollah's high-level commander Fuad Shakar in Beirut by the IDF. This week might mark a turning point in the multi-front war Israel has been fighting ever since October 7. And more than ever today, Israel would need its allies to stand up to the call and defend our common values facing direct threats of Iran's globalized terrorism. On April 14th, in the historic attack against Israel by Iran, the UK, France, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, and of course the United States, answered that call and fought side by side against Iranian missiles and drones. Now we are moments before a potential regional escalation, and the question remains, who will answer the call this time to fight with Israel against its enemies? And will the attack be thwarted? What is the current relationship between Israel and its Arab neighbors and the signatories of the Abraham Accords? And what is the actual current state of these accords? And are they the potential solution to avoid this war and this wide escalation? To explore this, we are honored to have with us today Ruth Wasserman Lande, an accomplished Israeli politician, diplomat, and Middle Eastern affairs expert. With a rich career in diplomacy, she has served as an advisor for the late President Shimon Peres, as the Deputy Ambassador to Egypt at the Israeli Embassy in Cairo, and for almost a decade as the Deputy Director General for International Affairs at the Israeli Federation of Local Authorities. As a former member of the Knesset for the Blue and White Party, Ruth has been a vocal advocate for coexistence and understanding between different communities in Israel and the broader Middle East. So Ruth, thank you very much for being with us today, and a friend of ELNET as always in these critical times. Let me ask you right away the doomsday question. Are we headed towards a regional war like we have never seen before in this region?
First of all, I would be a prophet if I could answer you a yes or a no answer. And I dare not take that role upon myself. There is quite a founded platform upon which one can say that this can definitely deteriorate into a regional war, which I dare say is something that Iran is looking for. In fact, if you allow me to just step one millimeter backwards, in order to answer your question more properly, the ideology of Iran is radical Islamic ideology. It's not Iran, it's the Islamic Republic of Iran. It's not the actual country and or the majority of its people, but it's the mullah regime ruling Iran. And it is pursuing, obviously, radical Islam of Shiite orientation. And the ideology, and this is something that needs to be completely and very clearly understood, sometimes sounds like a Hollywood movie, but it's world domination based on Sharia Shiite law. That's what they are aiming for, and this is what they've been working on since 1979, the revolution. Now, that's very critical to understand in order to answer your question, because it seems as if, and some commentators are, or many commentators are saying, that they don't want the situation to deteriorate into a regional war. Well, let's just examine that for 1 second. Why did they send Hamas into Gaza as a proxy to attack Israel? Obviously, they knew Israel would retaliate. There's no question. That kind of attack merits a retaliation, a significant one. Why do they try to undermine Abu Mazen in the West Bank for years with the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad? Why do they have Hamas in Lebanon? Not only Hezbollah, but also Hamas. They don't only rely on one proxy. They also have Hezbollah in Lebanon, obviously. They have Shiite militias in Syria, Shiite militias in Iraq, Shiite militias in Yemen, and that's not all. They're working on the African continent, plus the most important thing I think for Europeans to comprehend is that they've been working consistently on creating cells, Hezbollah cells, within varying European cities, some big, some small, some medium, infiltrating into society. It's very, very felt these days, but this is not new. This has been happening for many years, and infiltrating the minds and the trying to impact public opinion. And then we ask ourselves, do they want a regional war or don't they want a regional war? Well, they don't want Hezbollah to be critically hurt. No, because that's their baby, that's their prime proxy, Shiite prime proxy. But they do want attention away from what they need to do in order to get to their ideology. And that's the nuclear bomb. So they need the attention away. They got it with the Gaza war, but now they're trying to create more of a scene, and we need to watch the West Bank, particularly in this moment.
So thank you for that. And also we received a positive comment thanking you for making the distinction between Iran and the Islamic Republic.
Absolutely.
Before zooming in, as you just mentioned, the West Bank, so you're saying the main ideology is to reach the nuclear capabilities, which has been the main threat. But they're threatening also not only Israel, but also their neighboring countries that are not aligned with the Islamic Republic's ideology. So, and to the question regarding the Abraham Accords, isn't that what was supposed to be a solution? An alliance of like-minded countries in the region to offer a response to this regime?
So first of all, the answer is most definitely yes. And of course, they pose a threat to other countries, not only the West, but of course, Sunni, so-called moderate countries in the region that seek stability. So the issue is as follows. What the Iranians saw the day before, or let's say the period before October 7, is they saw Israel becoming closer to the United Arab Emirates, to Bahrain, Morocco. By the way, Morocco also had issues with Iran because Iran supported opponents of Morocco, such as the Algerians on certain issues. There is always an Iranian, or rather, again, the Islamic Republic of Iranian, mullah regimes kind of support to destabilize a certain region. The Houthis, for example, were not a thorn in our neck, but rather in the neck of Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, and they remain that. Now, everybody understands what Iran is, but there is an issue of interest. That's what was the case before October 7. Currently, there is not a reason of love that Jordan is preparing itself to help Israel, in inverted commas, stave off, an attack by the Iranian missiles. Rather, it doesn't want to be destabilized by Iran. Now, very recently, we need to remember this, and this is critical. Very recently, the Jordanian king made a very unusual statement, public statement, telling Iran to get off its territory and stop meddling in internal sovereign Jordanian affairs, because it's not that the Iranians were not meddling before, but this has, reached a certain capacity, and the Jordanian king understood that what the Iranians were doing is galvanizing support amidst the majority of the Palestinian population within Jordan, strengthening Hamas within Jordan, and trying to overthrow the regime, which is too stable, too pro-Western, too so-called pro-Israeli, although that's a bit of a joke, but, it's still relatively pro-Israeli. And the reason why they are galvanizing now support against Iran is because they understand exactly what you asked a minute ago. They understand that the core of the actions of the Islamic Republic of Iran is to destabilize regions, then they go in and it's easier for them to gain control. They've tried to do that in Jordan. The Jordanians really last minute got on their tiptoes and stopped it. But what worries me very, very much, and this is something that is not a small concern, but a huge concern, is Egypt. As a huge propagator of Egypt, a huge supporter of the Israeli-Egyptian peace forever. I spent 3 years in Cairo, as you had said. There has not been a war, full-out war with Egypt for over 40 years since the peace agreement. There's been excellent intelligence cooperation. We allowed the Egyptians to open the peace accord and to put in more forces and more equipment into the Sinai Peninsula. But in the past 2 years, or maybe a year and a little bit, there's been a huge amount of forces, a huge amount of equipment, and a huge amount of preparation on the part of Egypt in the Sinai Peninsula, preparing Egypt for war. Now, one asks oneself, for war with whom? It was originally supposed to be for war against ISIS in Egypt, in the Sinai Peninsula. But this is not an equipment and not a presence that merits a war against a terrorist organization. It doesn't make sense that it's against the Hamas, because the Hamas was also a terrorist organization within Gaza. Plus, we find out that there are huge number of terror tunnels running from Rafah on the Gazan side to the Egyptian side. This is not a number of tunnels that the Egyptian regime could have overlooked. It's not something that could have not received a green light. And most recently, given the current situation, Egyptian president has said, we will not help to intercept the Iranian attack. And this is, I wouldn't say a casus belli, but a very, very clear, unprecedentedly clear statement from Egypt, because usually they don't say things that are very black or very white. They usually say things that tend to mean two things at the same time. But this time it was very, very clear. And it makes me remember the visit, the high-level visit of the Islamic Republic of Iran about 8 or 9 months ago to Egypt after October 7th attack. And I remind everybody who's listening that the Egyptians and the Iranians have no love lost between them. In fact, they have a very long history of estrangement, spying. The Shah is buried in the middle of Cairo. The person who killed former President Sadat, Islambuli, was given a lot of honor and a street named after him in Tehran. So there's no love lost between them. One is Shiite, one is Sunni. But it almost seems as if there is some kind of tacit understanding between Iran and Egypt, and that concerns me very much.
So how do you put in the same, I mean, the Middle East, everybody at the end of the day is trying to protect their own interests, right? So how do we put in the same scale the alert that you're talking about within the Egyptian arena, and at the same time, the Houthis are also now disturbing the area of the Red Sea and the Straits, and which leads directly to a very big problem in the Suez Canal, which undermines the Egyptian economy.
So that's exactly the thing. The question that I raise, and I really don't have the answer, is what did the Iranians promise the Egyptians, if at all? Perhaps I'm wrong. Again, I cannot find a comforting answer for the current statement of the Egyptians, nor for the tunnels that have been found running into Egyptian Rafah. But what has been promised, and one needs to very closely examine the Egyptian economy, which is in very, very dire straits. There is a policy of more insulation on the part of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. particularly in Saudi Arabia, there's an attempt to diversify sources of income rather than energy. And there's an attempt to try and stabilize the region and to really encourage more investment in Saudi Arabia itself. And there is less and less of an intent to help Egypt economically. The United States of America has presented itself, unfortunately, as a weak link in the Middle East for a lot of countries that felt that it left them. For example, Saudi Arabia at one point, and so on, and other partners, particularly after what had happened in Afghanistan and the withdrawal from Afghanistan. There's been a concern amidst some Arab countries, not discluding Egypt. And Egypt is almost inevitably looking for diversifying its economic health because its economic situation is very bad. So do we have Iran promising to lower the flames by the Houthis against the Egyptians so that the Egyptians, in fact, lose less or suffer less from what they're doing in the Straits? That's one possibility. And another possibility is to fund them, which the Iranians, or rather the Iranian mullah regime, are doing very well, while their own people very often are suffering from many, many deficiencies, many of them water, food, potential sources of employment, and so on.
So if we try in an optimistic way to look a little bit towards the future, we at ELNET, we try to, let's say, lure the Europeans to be more involved within the Abraham Accords, to say that this is the way towards a more stable region, more prosperous, and it's been an ongoing effort. Now, since you're saying that there's some sort of void created by an absent American administration, would the Europeans can then come in here and say, for the famous day after that we're all talking about, come and help the region and provide solutions? After all, the Suez Canal is the main access towards Europe as well.
Well, first of all, there are a number of levels to your question, and it's a hugely important one, so thank you. One, the Europeans cannot allow themselves, they don't have the privilege, in my humble opinion, to disclude themselves from what's happening in the region, because they are hugely affected by unbelievable waves of migration that have literally overtaken the continent. So that's, first of all, they cannot possibly ignore, put their heads in the sand, pretend that it's not there. It's just impossible, naive, or simply irresponsible, whatever one you prefer. So they have to take a stand on the issue because it affects them profusely. Now, regional cooperation with like-minded countries, they don't have to agree on everything. There are issues that are also perhaps difficult in even broadening the Abraham Accords, for example, a nuclear race and so on. But in essence, is a brilliant, productive, excellent way to first and foremost begin to disintegrate old stereotypes, hatreds, the fact that people to people don't really know one another. And I'm talking about Israel. Its business opportunities, its potential prosperity, and regional stability. Regional stability, exactly the opposite of what the Islamic Republic of Iran seeks, is what is good for Europe. Regional stability means that the countries prosper and no huge wave of immigration is going to take place. Now, that's one aspect of what's going on. Can the Europeans take over the American role? Again, in my humble opinion, no. And why is that? Although they, as I said before, have to take a stand, have to be involved, cannot allow themselves not to be involved. But can they take the actual role of the United States? No. And why is that? Because they've been sleeping for too long. And what is happening in the European continent, you don't need to be a genius to see that, is very frightening and very much there. Now, there are still politicians that are trying to disinform and misinform their publics and to...
I think I'll end the second.
Go on, please.
Sure. To really not only misinform the public, but to really cater to huge publics that don't necessarily have the good of that country and the well-being of that country in mind. And again, you don't have to be a genius or an Israeli or a Jew to see that at all. It's very, very plainly there. I'll give just 2-3 examples that scream to the sky. You have hundreds of thousands of Muslims praying on the streets, which is fine. I don't mind Muslim praying. On the contrary, it's beautiful. I love that. There are many, many mosques, for example, in the United Kingdom. Wonderful. Freedom of religion. Everybody should and can pray freely. However, there are, and I'm not talking about all Muslims, I'm talking about a radical statement being made by certain agitators that have that as their agenda. Praying, masses of people praying on the streets while there are mosques everywhere in the UK. Why is that? And blocking streets and completely disregarding law enforcement agencies. And this has been very rife. I mean, at the moment, there are huge demonstrations and terrible riots in the United Kingdom, which doesn't surprise me at all, but perhaps surprises some people. And the idea is territoriality, ownership. We are here. We are taking over. Now, you don't need to believe any commentator. You just need to listen to the interviews by Hamas, if it's Sunni radical Islam, or Hezbollah, if it's Shiite radical Islam, or other factors, interviewing in Arabic, of course, or Farsi, and saying, the idea is, by the way, Arabs are more open about it. Farsi radical Islamists are a little bit more sophisticated about their messages, even when they're not in English, but the message is clear. World domination, Sharia-based, those that want the Shiite version, those that want the Sunni version. When they'll kill all of us and destroy the entire universe and win, then they will fight one another, because Shiite and Sunni can never live in peace with one another. But until then, they have a way to go. But Europe is very, very, very much busy at the moment in either trying to hide from the public what is impossible already to hide. For example, some politicians that refuse to tell their publics the truth and say, we are really almost under control, or there is a realization, sometimes not politically correct, sometimes not pretty to listen to because it sounds harsh, but there is a realization, for example, like in the Netherlands by the Dutch government, and there is an attempt to do something about it. But I would say it's almost too late. Do they have the time, the energy, the possibility to also come in instead of the US in the Middle East? Thus, no.
Yeah, loud and clear. I would say though that we've seen on April 14th that both the UK and France did show up when the time has come to stand aside alongside Israel. But if we go back to our region and talk about again the potential of an alliance here, there were a lot of noises and discussions to whether the Saudis will ever sign an agreement with Israel. And then October 7 happened. Some say that Sinwar has done it in order to again foil that agreement. What's the future of that in your opinion? Is that the solution to avoid a greater war or even an instability here? Will an agreement between the Israelis and the Saudis bring things to a calm here for a few years?
So first of all, an agreement in general, as I said, and in general cooperation with countries in the Gulf area, in the region in general, is productive and positive. The price does matter, okay? The price does matter. So it's not at any cost that such an agreement should be signed, but in general, such agreement will bring regional stability, cooperation, people to people, prosperity, and so on. This is key to world stability. Yes, I absolutely think that. But as I said, there are key role players that are not interested in the stability. They're interested in weakening the West, and they're interested in therefore destabilizing. The destabilization is not an end in and within itself. It's a means to an end. Again, the end for the radical Islam is world domination based on Sharia law. But there are other factors in play. There's China, there's Russia. They all have in common a wish to weaken the West. That's, yes, they have a lowest common denominator. They all wish to expand their influence and sources, resources, in order to have more strength. Yes, but there is a difference, a marked difference between the end game for Russia, China, and Iran, for example. At the moment, they are using one another for a similar cause, and that is weakening the West. And it's a pity that it's taking the West time to wake up. Now, what Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates well understand, and recently, without any doubt, Jordan as well, because it took it some time to wake up. But what they do understand is that radical Islam is radical Islam. So, for example, whereas these kinds of demonstrations happen in Europe, if one Palestinian, and I'm again stressing it, raised a Palestinian flag in the United Arab Emirates in one of the universities, he was kicked out of the country. Just one. And if anybody is suspected of belonging to the Muslim Brotherhood in the United Arab Emirates, which is, by the way, a Sunni, largely Sunni country, and Muslim Brotherhood are Sunni, but they are radical Islamists, they are banned. They sit in jail. And there's no niceties about it. There's no politically correct about it. There's no, human rights discussions about it. It is what it is. It's banned and it's not permitted by law because they well understand what is radical Islam. It's a non-negotiable issue. It's right. You die so that I can become dominant and take over. And so, just to make the last point, that if we allow them to raise their heads as they do in Europe, the crime rate, the ownership over huge areas, many Islamists, I'm not talking about Muslim, but Islamist mayors in the UK have taken over in democratic elections, using the hospitality and the democracy for their own, what would never happen in Egypt, in Jordan, in the United Arab Emirates, in Saudi Arabia. They would be outlawed. They are, in fact, outlawed. So if this continues, we are going to go down with Europe. What you said before, and I need to harp on that France and Britain did have a role in the last time when they intercept. Yes, there's still time. And it's not about only helping Israel. It's basically protecting their own countries, which is the responsibility of every government.
We definitely have similar challenges. But when you mention, also remind our guests that if they have any questions, feel free to submit them to the chat. When you speak about radical ideology and the problem of ideology, it's very hard to eliminate or to get rid of, to speak more bluntly. But when the Israeli government and even the Israeli defense officials, when they talk about victory upon Hamas in Gaza, for instance, and we're starting to look for something the day after the end of this war, how do you see that happening? What's the future of that? Because Hamas is an ideology more than it is, again, a remaining functioning body. What's next within our own conflict?
So Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood is one. It's the same thing. And it is, in fact, an ideology. In fact, in order to understand how much of an ideology it is, you don't even need to, study it for 30 years or understand the Quran or speak Arabic, although all of these things help to open one's eyes. But one just needs to look at what the perpetrators on October 7th posted themselves. In other words, they were proud of their deeds, okay? They shared on social media videos of quite horrific and heinous acts of gang rape, cutting off private parts of bodies, really cutting off heads, killing children, really horrific things. And there were some instances, and you can't even make that up. It's so bad, of some of the perpetrators calling their mom. Can you imagine calling your own mother who gave birth to you and telling her proudly and loudly that you killed with your own bare hands 10 Jews? So in order to reach that kind of mindset, one understands a relatively normal, not indoctrinated human being would, relatively educated, would understand that you need to be extremely indoctrinated. So that goes back to your question of ideology. The indoctrination that goes on in a radical Islamist surrounding. In the case of Gaza, it was untouched. So there was no Israeli influence there, no Israeli presence there since 2006. And UNRWA, that was basically funded by the Europeans, by Americans, by the international arena, by the UN. It's a UN body with millions and millions of dollars of taxpayers' money, okay? They not only didn't supervise this kind of indoctrination, on the contrary, they were part and parcel of it. And if you let it be the education, the indoctrination, the incitement, it's doomed. It doesn't matter how many Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood, radicals you kill, because the indoctrination lives on. So what you have to take into account is that you not only need to root out the perpetrators, you need to reinstate an educational system and very strongly supervise, like in the United Arab Emirates, against radical practices, radical preachings, radical thoughts. You have to supervise this, otherwise it happens. Either it happens openly, like in Gaza, because nobody bothered to stop it, and in Europe, because nobody bothers to stop it, and in some places in the United States, and so on and so forth, or clandestinely. So they try to do it under the radar if it's supervised, but therefore the supervision needs to be very, very stringent, which means that it can be democratic, but to a point, in order to be rooted out. There needs to be a reinstatement of education. And if that doesn't happen, it doesn't matter how many people you kill. Now, I'd just like to emphasize that not only in the Gaza Strip there was that kind of radical incitement and indoctrination, but in the West Bank as well, under Abu Mazen, the so-called elected, re-elected Palestinian president who was accepted by the international arena. the indoctrination and incitement was horrific. And it's not, you don't need to rely on my word. It's all out there. The books are out there. The textbooks are out there. It's UNRWA taking whatever content there is and actually implementing it. Again, paid by the international arena. And one more word, Jordan as well. 70 to 80% population is Palestinian. Indoctrination and incitement in the curriculum is inherent. So when you think about reinstating values, it's not that you need to put your own Western values in there, but you need to, like in the United Arab Emirates, be very stringent on what people learn, the messages that they get, and to arrest and stop those who try to indoctrinate for radicalism. Otherwise, it won't work. And that's in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, Europe, Jordan, and so on.
And should it, I mean, shouldn't it be, should it be Israel's responsibility to do such a thing? And how would you replace that indoctrination? By who? Because if the PA cannot do that in Gaza or the West Bank, and obviously Hamas cannot, how can we make this happen?
Okay, so first of all, let's just remind, I mean, China now sort of brokered a deal between Hamas and Fatah, which is the biggest joke I've ever heard in my entire life, because Hamas and Fatah hate one another more than they hate us. So whoever wants to get credit for being a good negotiator, that's great, but it's very unrealistic. It's like Sunni and Shia cooperating because they need one another, but this is just an interim situation. They are not going to cooperate long-term in the long run because they hate one another. It is not compatible for one another. Fatah is a secular, nationalistic Palestinian movement. Hamas is a religious movement. They don't go together. It's like water and oil. So when you talk about who needs to implement this, okay, so let's examine this for a second. Israel cannot be expected, nor does it want to, reorganize and re-establish the educational system and the messaging, definitely not in a sovereign state like Jordan, okay? Not in Egypt, where there's a lot of incitement as well against Israel, the Jews, Western issues, and so on, even though it receives a huge aid package from the West, not to mention Jordan as well. But these countries are very stringent on outlawing radical Islam, okay? In the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, Israel cannot be expected to be sort of neutral and, you know, create a new educational system and supervise it, nor does it want to. So it needs to be done by an external factor. Now, can that external factor be the Palestinian Authority? I mean, in all, you know, good intentions and with all respect, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank just has the same indoctrination. So obviously this cannot be giving the cat the possibility to take care of the cream. It doesn't make sense. Plus, let me reiterate, the Hamas hates the Palestinian Authority. There is no way on God's earth that they will let them rule or stop their own educational system or interfere for one single minute. And anybody who thinks otherwise, I bring you back to 2006, when exactly that happened. We brought in the Palestinian Authority to take responsibility over Gaza. When we evacuated Gaza, we left nothing. In other words, no Israeli presence at all. We even removed Israeli bones from graves. We moved any Jewish presence from the Gaza Strip, brought in the Palestinian Authority. What did the Hamas do? They shot the Fatah operatives in the kneecaps and threw them out the windows. That's what they did. They are not going to sit together and rule together. The best they will do is use them as a front to carry out their own radical ideology. But that's the best scenario. So who, yes, Can the Europeans do it? That was my answer to you before. The Europeans should be very, very, very busy with stabilizing their own continent because they are in dire threat. And they should be very, very busy with that. In my humble opinion, they're not busy enough at the moment. And already one can see the suffering. Can the United States be part of this? Yes, and it should be. But is it enough? In my humble opinion, and I haven't, consulted with the Emiratis on this or the Saudis on this, on whether they want to go into this very complex situation. And again, I stress that they have a more insular policy. But given the fact that they do want regional stability, and regional stability cannot be achieved with radical forces and or education and indoctrination in the region, as you can see. So I would think that the best partners to carry out the supervision, plus they're Muslims, so it's not like a foreign infiltration like by the Israelis or by the Europeans, that they should play a part if they are willing. And God willing, they should be willing, again, to stabilize the region and bring prosperity to the people of the region by having a lack or a void of that indoctrination and radicalism.
Just before I turn to a few questions we've had from our audience, do you think Israel will agree that signatories of the Abraham Accords will send either officers or diplomats or representatives to do what you're suggesting?
Yes. Again, not instead of Israeli armed troops taking care that our civilians don't get killed, murdered, raped, and massacred, and also to make sure that the Emiratis and or Saudis don't get killed, raped, murdered, and massacred. But certainly, I believe that the Israelis would welcome that because we've seen that they were capable of doing that in their own countries.
Okay. I'd like to turn now to Q&A. And for the first one, I'd like to turn to John and Mirish, please, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, John.
Hey, Ruth, how are you?
Very good. It's beautiful to see you.
Nice to see you too. I think my question was, and please correct me if I'm wrong, was that wouldn't it be a good strategy to cut off the head of the snake? And if no one else is willing to do it, shouldn't Israel be the one to do that? Of course, they would be doing a mitzvah for the world, and that may sound too simple, but rather than fight proxy regional battles that only benefit Iran, and we saw a little bit of that taking out of Hania, shouldn't we be taking it to Iran? We meaning Israel.
So definitely the head of the snake is the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Right.
There's no question about it. Everybody who's anybody and has intelligence services and agencies know it. Maybe some of the public doesn't know it, but anybody who has any kind of integrity in terms of capabilities in intelligence know it. It's not even a question. In fact, very recently, the U.S. head of the intelligence came out and said, I think she said, I'm not certain that I'm quoting the exact words, but she said that Iran stands behind funding the internal demonstrations in the United States of America. So obviously they're not spontaneous. This was premeditated. All the campaigns in the West are also backed by Iran. By the way, they're backed by Qatar as well, but she spoke specifically about Iran. But yes, Israel is already fighting, or rather being the front for the world. I mean, fighting Hamas, and we have no option but to fight Hamas, because basically they are sitting almost on our heads. There was no even no man's land. There was no even a barrier or a kind of a kilometer or two between the Israeli villages in the south of Israel and the Gaza Strip. So they were sitting literally on top of Israel, okay, the Hamas. So we had no choice but to retaliate after what had happened. And that was exactly the plan for Iran, to stave off attention from it and have us and the world busy with them, although it's a very teeny tiny part of the puzzle. You're right. Likewise,
well, I think it was also to try and stop an expansion of the Abraham Accords. But I'll be more specific. If we could take out Haniyeh, we can take out Khomeini. And before people start saying, oh, the guy's like Hitler, don't we think that if in World War II we could have taken out Hitler, we should have done that? So is that something that should be considered? Would that act as a deterrent? And also a direct attack on the nuclear capacity of Iran? Wouldn't that send a message? And wouldn't that cause them to try and focus on internal politics when they think the regime may be in danger of being overthrown rather than creating regional mischief?
Well, in theory, yes, there's no question about it. In practice, Israel is, at the end of the day, a small country with brilliant capabilities, unbelievable spirit, which is a very important part of being able to fight, very, very poor public relations capabilities, and allies when, it comes to the very, 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 very nitty-gritty, then some allies sort of align because of interests. But Israel cannot do something like that alone. And in order to do that, it needs a coalition. Should there be such a coalition? Absolutely, yes, without a single doubt. And perhaps we should not elaborate more on that, because these kinds of things are better when they are less talked about and, remain as potential, because the potential is there. Inevitably, it's there. But if you're right, theoretically, absolutely.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you. I'd like to turn now to Zori Mizrahi with a short but pointy question.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Ruth, for your beautiful approach to this issue of the Islamic Republic. I guess this would be a follow-up to John Mirish's question, and that is, why would you want to send any military or soldiers to Iran to do what the Iranian people have been trying to do for the past several years, and that is the removal of the Islamic Republic? Instead of appeasing the mullahs, instead of catering to them and financing their operations, why not focus on people inside Iran that have been trying to get rid of this regime for the past several years? I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So very obviously, there's a lot of discontent amidst Iranian people against the regime. In fact, I myself was involved in the beautiful movement of the women freedom. And it was awful to see that the regime picked the most beautiful and prominent women from the demonstrators, and they had a policy of shooting them in one eye with a metal bullet, taking out one eye. And then there was a movement of creating murals throughout the world in prominent cities, including in Israel, of those women who had either been killed and or maimed and or, God forbid, raped, gang raped in the prisons in Iran. The Iranian people, and I think it's clear, are the first ones that stand with Israel all over the world when it comes to understanding the difficulty and the threats of radical Islam, because they've lived with that regime for decades already. Sending Israeli troops to Iran or to the Islamic Republic of Iran is a complete non-issue. It's not going to happen. Israel is not going to do something like that. If it will do something, if it will retaliate, if it will create any kind of solution like John Mirish had mentioned, it would be technological, it would be military, but not with troops. It would not entail troops. Regarding encouraging, if I understand your question correctly, local Iranians in their fight against the regime, that is something that the world needs to wake up to and do, led by the United States of America. Hello, wake up, it's about time, because the people of Iran are suffering. And I hate to remind, but there were very big companies, American companies, that had not only not done anything against Hitler at the time, but in fact cooperated and participated in the Nazi war mongering. And it took America a very long time to go into the war and annihilate the Nazi threat. The fact that they knew about the camps wasn't enough. And in the same manner, very different, of course, but in a similar manner, not in the same manner, people know of the suffering of the Iranian people. People know of the suffering of Sudanese people. People are massacred and murdered in a lot of places in the world. Is the world coming to help? No, because most people couldn't care less. Israel is fighting a war for the enlightened Western world. And I'm not exaggerating in saying that. I mean, fighting radicalism in Gaza, in the West, in Lebanon, in Syria, from the Houthis in Yemen, from Iran, is insanity. Plus maintaining the equal rights of Arab citizens, Muslim citizens within the state of Israel, which many people, by the way, the vast public in the international read don't even realize that 25% of the Israeli population are Arabs, the vast majority of which are Muslims. So if you take all of that, already Israel is at the forefront of the fight. Is it leaning upon the sentiments of certain Iranians, anti-regime Iranians in Iran? You can believe me when I say that they are. We are. It's not by magic that the capabilities that are being carried out in Iran are carried out. It's not by, magic of the universe. There are so many people in that country, including in very, very, very high places of the regime, that absolutely detest the regime. And they're willing to cooperate and to do all sorts of things because they had enough. So there are more sophisticated ways in which to encourage, but it's not all Israel's role. At the end of the day, we are fighting a huge, difficult, long war. I remind everybody that we still have 115 hostages that are still held by barbaric people in Gaza. It's just unbelievable. Unbelievable. It's like the Yazidis. They don't have an army, so nobody cares. Nobody cares. The thousands of these people and women are still being held. It's crazy, in my opinion.
Right.
I mean, these are human beings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For last question, I think we can squeeze in the last one, please, from Stephanie Cronson. Stephanie? All right. Doesn't seem to be working, so I'll steal the spotlight and ask you a last question myself. If we dive into our local situation within Israel, where do you see now, in an easy question, the next few months politically? Because we have also our differences within our country, but also our communities, and we've seen what happened with the Jews community, but we have a very big Arab minority within Israel.
Go away.
You've been to the Knesset, so what's upcoming for us here?
I think Stephanie's back. Should I answer your question? Or
You want to avoid the political question? We'll turn to Stephanie.
No, on the contrary, I wouldn't mind answering it at all. Should I answer it first, and then we'll go to Stephanie, or whatever you decide?
Let's give Stephanie the floor. Guests first.
Thank you. I don't know. I submitted so many questions. I'm not sure which of the moderators wanted me
We've
to
received
ask.
quite a few. If you have one that is more important for you than the others, go for it.
I mean, they're all pretty important, but from a UK perspective, I just wanted to mention that the Muslim Brotherhood political arm is still legal in the UK and not considered a threat despite subversion tactics, recruiting ordinary Muslims and non-Muslims. And it seems insane not to respond appropriately to protect our values. But what can we do to encourage our governments to wake up, really?
Okay. So first of all, thank you so much for that question. I spoke widely about the UK, and it's absolutely awful what's happening there. Are you a journalist? I just want to...
No.
No, but I hear you're British because of the accent, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you know the arena very well. You know exactly what's happening. You know of the mass prayers outside in an attempt to sort of pronounce or declare territoriality, ownership, and so on. The demonstrations, the mayors taking over in democratic elections, and so on. I think the first thing that needs to be done, and this is something that you can do, anybody can do, journalists can do, public speakers can do, a regular person that has, in their professional syndicates can do. Syndicates are big, they're strong in the UK still. This is something that needs to be done, in my humble opinion, if you care, and that is to make people understand, because they don't know. I mean, they see things they don't like maybe, but they don't know. They don't, I mean, they are fed a certain line of information. And I humbly say that my country really is very bad at information dispersion and explanation of anything and PR. I mean, honestly, it's about time we woke up on that issue. But until we do, you can explain. And it's not something they need to trust you on or believe me or anybody that is either Jewish, Israeli, Western. All they need to do is just research a little bit, but you need to trigger that knowledge, that curiosity in them. Have them go online and hear the interviews of Muslim Brotherhood or Hamas people. So they don't know Arabic, have somebody speaking Arabic that's not a Muslim Brotherhood person, okay, that's seemingly neutral, translate to them, because what they say is just, it is what it is. We are going to take over the world, okay? Jerusalem, Rome, they mention Rome. They speak about Europe. They say these words. This is from the writings of the Quran. It's not something that, we just made up. It's there. It's black and white. We will take over. By the way, you don't even need their interviews. What they say in the demonstrations, look at France. They're huge demonstrations. What do they say? They don't say down with Israel. They don't say that. I mean, they hate us, but they don't say that. They say down with France. So you don't need to go far. They yell that. And what do they say to the British policemen? What do they say? I don't want to say the words. It's very impolite, but you know what they say. They say what they say. They yell at them. They curse at them. They behave very badly towards the women policemen. They completely disregard them. And British policemen are unarmed, apart from one counterterrorism unit that is specifically, it is an armed unit. But the entirety of the law enforcement police force is unarmed. For them, it's nothing. It's not something to stand up against. And you need to explain that to schools, to educators, to syndicates, to people, home gatherings, to have journalists. I did that. I gave a briefing in Brussels about 3 weeks ago, and I think it was the European ELNET, or I don't remember which platform, published a whole article about the UK. If you want, I'll send it to Daniel and he can send it to you. He
share
took
it.
it specifically to the UK because it's so out there. You just need to pique the curiosity of the people around you and have them circulate that, and it will make an influence because it's a democracy.
But
Ruth,
so
on
I
that
just
note, I'm sorry, we have reached our hour
Okay.
limit, and for short closing remarks, first of all, Ruth, thank you very much for a very insightful tour de table of the situation right now, and for a short closing, please, Larry Hochberg, our co-founder. Larry, just unmute if you can.
Your opinions should not be characterized as humble, because your opinions are very solid, Ms. Lande. That's the first thing. Secondly, as ELNET, we're faced now with the UK new government. Situation in France is unstable. It costs us $5,000 of your money, our money, or whatever, to have a newly elected person come to Israel and see what you're describing firsthand. That is what we do. And those of us who have these great questions also need to support our work, because we can't do it without funding. So I'll leave you with that. It's a wonderful presentation, and really appreciate your views, and very respectful of what you had to say.
Thank you so much.